H2O Church. So whether you're part of the H2O Church family or you're just tuning in to this time, we're glad you're here. Before I get started, well, actually, one thing, couple of requirements. We do require that you have a cup of coffee. So if you want to grab that, you might want to get a notepad or something to take some notes on. And we're going to be looking at Psalm 31 here in just a few minutes. Before we jump in, I want to tell you what I'm doing tonight is we're going to do a 5-part Journey to the Cross Facebook Live event. So starting this evening at 7 o'clock, I am going to walk us through the Last Supper. And there's a lot of interesting details about that you may not be aware of. Then at 9 o'clock, we're going to go to the Garden of Gethsemane. And then Friday morning at 8, we're going to look at the trials of Jesus, which is fascinating, actually. And then 9 o'clock is part 4, and noon is part 5, and those two will be looking at the crucifixion. So if I can get through it, I invite you to join me. This morning, we're going to look through Psalm 31, and the reason we're doing this is during this stressful time, we want to really cultivate a deeper walk with God, a deeper knowledge of who He is. And so we've been looking through the Psalms and following through this acronym, PSALM. And if you haven't already heard this, you want to write this down at this point. But P, the question there is, what is the psalmist feeling? S is, what is the situation? A is, what does he ask or assert? L is, what does this say about the Lord? And M is, what does this say about me? And we're doing this because prayer is an intimate conversation with God. We are invited to pour out our hearts, to express our feelings. We talked about that in Psalm 22. Verse 1, David writes, my God, why have you forsaken me? We're invited to a language of emotion, a language of honesty with God. And this acronym walks us through David's Psalms in such a way that we can connect them to us. So I hope this morning is helpful to you. So let's begin. With that acronym, I encourage us all to begin with S, the situation. And so I want to point out in verse 4, it says that you take me out of the net that they have hidden from me. So that's a little clue here. It'll help to understand David's life. David spent time running from wicked King Saul as a young man where he was in the wilderness. And so some of the Psalms are written from that time period. David became king, and you'll find Psalms that have to do with his kingship and also having to do with this moral failure, like Psalm 32 and 51 have to do with moral failure. And then later in his life, there was a coup planned against him by his son Absalom, and there was a plot against him. And I think that this psalm here is likely from that period. That verse alone says that there has been a net spread for him. Verse 8, if you look down, you have delivered me out of the hand of my enemy. And so, again, there is a plot, there is an enemy. In verse, I think it is 13, I hear the whispering of many, terror on every side, and they schemed together against me as they plot to take away my life. That's probably the clearest situational clue that you're going to find in the Psalms. You hear whispering, and it's all around him, and there is a scheme to take his life. And so to me, this sounds like a growing conspiracy, and maybe is from the time of Absalom, but he is likely an older man at this point. That's probably enough about the situation. So let's go back to the P, which is, what is the psalmist feeling? And again, the whole idea here is that as we get more in touch with recognizing uh, David's freedom to communicate his emotions to God, then it will help us to be able to pray our emotions to God. So in verses 1 and 2, in you, O Lord, I have taken refuge. Let me never be put to shame. In your righteousness, deliver me. Incline your ear to me. Rescue me speedily. And I don't know what you hear. There's not necessarily a right or wrong here, but I see someone who is needy and desperate. And I want to point out that when he says, incline your ear to me, Psalm 116, verses 1 and 2, we've already talked about this, says, I love the Lord because he hears my voice and inclines his ear to me. And so I pray that often to God. God, thank you that you stoop, that I have your attention, that as I am praying, you are listening to me. This is a key thing in understanding the fatherhood of God, to see how God gives us all of his attention. So I see David being needy and desperate there. One of the things that's great about the Psalms is we can watch David go on a roller coaster, because in verse 7 he says, I will rejoice and be glad in your steadfast love, because you have seen my affliction. You've known the distress of my soul, and you have not delivered me into the hand of the enemy. You have set my feet in a broad place. So now he's feeling assured. He's gone from being needy and desperate to feeling assured. And that's our roller coaster of faith. One day, our feelings may be controlling us and we're being defeated. And then the very next day, we remember truth. And we're like, you have not given up on me. You have not handed me over into the hands of the enemy. And he goes from there in the very next verses, 9 and 10, to feeling distressed and grieved and depleted. So again, we see this roller coaster. I'd encourage you to read through the entire psalm and see what feelings you recognize. I just want to give you a few that I see. In verses 11 and 12, I see him feeling lonely and forgotten. In verse 13, terrified. So if this coronavirus is terrifying you, and it is many, you're not alone. And some of the things that David said are things that we can say. And then again in verse 14, you'll see that he is assured. He says, but I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. My times, right now, my life, all I'm going through, all I'm feeling, all I'm experiencing is right here in your hand. And Jesus shared the same thing. Jesus said that not only are we in his hand, but the Father has his hand around us as well. Okay, as you continue down through the psalm and you get to verses 19 and 19 through probably 22, he feels safe, he feels loved. Again, we see this roller coaster. This psalm was probably written on multiple days. It was not a one-time sitting. And he arrives. I want to read to you the last verse. Be strong and let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord. And so he's arrived at being hopeful. So this is really important that we understand this. And Steve has been talking about this on Mental Health Monday. I've been talking about this through our teachings over the last month, that doubt is like a fog machine that starts to blow through our mind, and our ability to recognize truth and reality is distorted. The narrative of our lives ends up getting hijacked. Our emotions end up in a totally different place. And so what we'll see, one of the best things that the Psalms has done for me, one of the best things the Psalms has done for me, is it has taught me to take my feelings to God and then to assert truth, to respond to the situation I'm in and what I'm feeling with truth. And so let's go there right now. We've done the situation. We've done the psalmist, what is he feeling? And now, what does he ask or assert about God? Now, those are two different questions. I'm just going to look at asserting today. Sometimes David asks things of God that make me pause and make me think, man, do I ever talk to God that way? But I just want to look at the truth that he asserts. So again, we're looking at a situation that's hard. We're looking at a person that is struggling, and they've had all of these feelings, and then out of nowhere, it seems, he begins to assert truth. He begins to speak truth to himself. And if you can learn to do that as a Christ follower, if you can go from saying, God, I'm needy and desperate, but this is the way you are, you will be greatly blessed by that. So I want you to look at verse 7. Again, he has just shared all of these negative emotions. And then he says, I will rejoice and be glad in your steadfast love, because you have seen my affliction. You have known the distress of my soul. You have not delivered me into the hand of the enemy. You have set my feet in a broad place. And I have prayed almost those exact words to God. Thank you, God, that you see me. You know me. You know my heart. You know what I'm feeling. I am not alone. You have not given up on me. I feel anxious, but God, you are right here with me. There's a truth flip that David wants to teach us, where we go from our emotions and we assert truth about God. We see it again in verse 14 and 15. He is feeling lonely, forgotten, and terrified, but then he says, but I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Despite everything that I'm feeling, despite the circumstances that I'm seeing around me, my times are in your hand. What a beautiful truth. And he does this particularly in verses 19, beginning in 19, and this is really powerful stuff right here. Verse 19, oh, how abundant is your goodness, which you have stored up for those who fear you, and worked for those who take refuge in you in the sight of the children of mankind. And I just want you to let that sink in. David is saying of God, you store up goodness for us. You store things up for us. In the cover of your presence, you hide them. Again, that is a powerful image that we can pray that despite all I'm going through, actually, God, I'm covered right now. In your presence, I am safe. So he asserts truth, and that has helped my life so much. And I just want to very briefly close by looking at the L and the M in the acronym. What does this say about the Lord, and what does this say about me? This is very subjective. Not that truth about God is subjective, but what you're going to see about God is going to vary for each of us. So I just wrote down the things that I see in this psalm that have affected me. God sees and knows and secures me. That's verses 7 and 8. God has my life in his hands. That's verse 15. God covers me. I'm hidden from danger in his presence. God has stored up goodness for me. As I look at the future, God has good things in store for me. And this last one is really powerful. God can show his wondrous love for me in the worst circumstances. And I want to tell you where I got that. If you look at verse 21, blessed be the Lord, for he has wondrously shown his steadfast love to me when I was in a besieged city. That's a powerful truth. David was in a city that was under attack. His emotions must have gone crazy. And yet God used the worst of circumstances to reveal his love. So that is something I pray to God a lot when I'm going through difficulty is, God, thank you that you're able to show your wondrous love in a besieged city or in the most difficult circumstances. And then lastly, again, very subjective, what does this say about me? So I don't know what you get out of this psalm, but for me, what I wrote down is I want to run to God. I want to run to God when I'm feeling stress, when I'm feeling anxiety. I don't want to run to other things. I don't want to medicate. I want to run to God. So having seen these things in this Psalms, hey, can I just take a minute and pray for you guys? God, I thank you for the circumstances we face, and they are over our head, but they are under your feet. Thank you that you see us. Thank you that you know us. Thank you that when our anxious thoughts are multiplied within us, your consolations, your words of love can comfort our soul. Thank you that when we say that we are anxious and afraid, you invite us to a deeper trust. You say, fear not. And thank you that in these worst of circumstances, you are able to make your love for us wondrous. And so I pray for the H2O community and anyone else that might be watching this as we engage with you, God, in the Psalms. Would you speak truth and comfort? Would you help us become people that will experience this flip of truth and say, I'm anxious, but God is on the throne. Thank you for this time together. Hope this is helpful to you guys. Want to remind you tonight at 7 o'clock, we're going to be looking at the Last Supper. So hope you can join me then.